Hi, my name is Kailyn Johnson, and I am the lead analyst for the cyber desk here at Sibylline. In today's Insight podcast, we will be discussing the monthly cyber trends that we noticed for the month of September. I am here today with my colleague Denise, who will be going over some of the additional cyber trends that were not noted in our September iteration of the Cyber Monthly. So Denise, in our September iteration of the Cyber Monthly, we talked about 3 different trends, one of them being Chinese state-sponsored operations in the APAC region or Asia Pacific region, cyber criminals and state-sponsored actors continuing to use software vulnerabilities in their operations, as well as the increasing use of generative AI for operations. But there, notice so many others that happened throughout the month of September. What are some of the key ones that you think are important for clients to note that weren't in the Cyber Monthly we produced?
Yeah, of course. So we've definitely looked at several other trends throughout the month of September. One of them that really comes to mind is attacks against cryptocurrency firms. We've definitely noticed a shift in attacks towards this sector. And that is a kind of reduction in attacks targeting the blockchain. Actually, there's been a 19% reduction in attacks from the first half of 2023 to the first half of 2024. But I think that what's important to note is why this kind of reduction in attacks has happened. And there's probably 2 reasons for this. The first one, there's definitely been an uptick in the legitimate use of the blockchain compared to actually illicit activities. But also this is actually telling something about the threat landscape and the tactics being used by cyber criminals in particular. So we've definitely noticed that cyber attacks towards cryptocurrency companies have actually become highly sophisticated and highly tailored as well. Threat actors are becoming a lot more skilled and more knowledgeable about modern kind of security mechanisms and are also conducting a lot more reconnaissance prior to attacks to really be able to tailor these attacks further and also just kind of be a bit more successful. A couple of those examples have actually included social engineering and phishing, which is obviously like a really big concern in cybersecurity. And threat actors have kind of demonstrated that knowledge with emulating multi-factor authentication pages, legitimate login pages, and really using these to trick victims into entering their credentials. And another thing really to note is their ability to kind of communicate with victims in real time, which obviously enhances legitimacy and also bolsters their chances of kind of success and of really just being able to steal money from kind of cryptocurrency wallets and just really get in that profit.
So with cryptocurrency theft right now, is it only targeting cryptocurrency firms, or is it targeting kind of anyone who has cryptocurrency, which could include, businesses or just individuals, and like have kind of second order impact, or is it kind of fairly niche in the kind of cryptocurrency firm and financial services sector primarily? Is that kind of what you're saying?
It'll be both. So it's both directed at the companies, but also at the users as well. So again, as kind of I mentioned, one really big focus is the theft of credentials, which is something that threat actors are really focusing on. And they'll be seeing credentials to really take over those accounts and then steal funds from cryptocurrency users.
So then with that, because obviously cryptocurrency can be a lot more difficult to trace, is there then the possibility that once this information is stolen, these cryptocurrency wallets have their information and data taken from them, can organizations get that back? Is there, have we seen an increase in organizations developing more security protocols around their own users and their own kind of wallets on how to better secure that? Or have we seen any kind of trends with that side as well?
Not necessarily trends in terms of protecting cryptocurrency users, but again, as usual, there's obviously a very big focus on protecting organizations from phishing and social engineering, which is obviously a focus in these cases. And I think in this specific case and with the kind of trends that we've seen emerging, that should, again, be a focus in terms of cybersecurity going ahead to really just protect users and have that kind of awareness around these types of attacks.
Yeah, cool. So you said that as well, like they're utilizing social engineering, phishing as like some of the key tactics for obtaining access and like building rapport with these users, sometimes with like long-term reconnaissance periods. And they've obviously kind of increased their sophistication. So with that though, like there's also today you mentioned in the Cyber Daily that there's been an increase in like exploiting cloud environments. So are we seeing a lot more cyber criminals becoming sophisticated, or are they just now having access to sophisticated kind of means?
I think it's a combination of both. There's definitely a development in tactics, but this is very much kind of dependent to on access as well. So we've seen kind of cooperation between different groups, which is also not necessarily just cyber criminals, but also cyber criminals and occasionally state-sponsored actors. So obviously sharing tactics and becoming more sophisticated through that. But we've also seen an uptick in, for example, the commercialization, I guess, of criminality within cyber as well, which is making different tactics a lot more accessible to, say, criminals that aren't necessarily that skilled. And so it's probably a combination of both really feeding into that sort of increase in attacks.
Interesting. So basically, social engineering, phishing have always been issues and continue to be issues, even though there's been somewhat of an increase in drive by a lot of organizations to like have better like cyber hygiene. But it obviously is not fully successful, or just more cyber criminals are becoming a lot more nuanced and doing a lot better with being, personable and trying to build the rapport before actually sending links that are malicious. But with the interesting that is that like cyber criminals and state-sponsored actors are also working together. Obviously, I know with like North Korean actors very heavily into cryptocurrency theft and utilizing like long-term social engineering engagements to build rapport to then like before even sending, phishing messages to actually do their operations that they've planned for. So we're seeing kind of North Korean actors specifically with this. Like I know they've got their own sophistication in that world in general, but are we seeing they kind of are sharing that knowledge, or are we kind of seeing cyber criminals taking that knowledge from post incident response kind of reports that come out about some of these attacks, that then they utilize that information? Kind of, is that is it both chicken and the egg? Like what's going on?
We've actually seen recently, since you've mentioned it, actual cooperation between the two groups working together for financial purposes. So it kind of feeds both ways. There's definitely more of an interest from, and especially as you said, from North Korean actors, where these types of kind of financially motivated operations are really a staple of the type of cyber operations that state-sponsored groups tend to focus on, but more generally expanding also to other groups, for example, associated with the Iranian government, just really focusing on financially motivated operations, and for this reason, then seeking cooperation with cyber criminal groups and just kind of working together in that sense to be able to kind of get that kind of financial profit.
Interesting. Have we noticed anything with North Korean actors specifically with cryptocurrency operations during September? Is that I know that because it's constantly happening because of economic sanctions. They moved from SWIFT and banking transactions, stealing money that way, to cryptocurrency, and that's always been a big thing that like they focus on. Have we noticed any big trends that or big activity from them throughout September?
I think possibly two Korean groups. Okay. This is Citrinsley and Kimsuki, which are recent, reports. Both of them kind of part of bigger cryptocurrency campaigns, really just aimed at targeting those cryptocurrency firms for financial profit, and in particular kind of focusing on both the exploitation of vulnerabilities and zero-day vulnerabilities, as well as using really tailored social engineering approaches to be able to kind of infiltrate organizations and then ultimately either kind of infiltrate those crypto mining processes or just kind of stealing credentials and ultimately steal funds that way.
It's interesting. It's like, again, phishing and software vulnerabilities. I know last week Mandiant released a report on the exploitation of software vulnerabilities throughout 2023 and early mid-2024. And they found that between 138 zero-day vulnerabilities, 70% of those 138 vulnerabilities that they observed being disclosed throughout 2023, early 2024. 70% of those were exploited as a 0-day. So and we talked about it as well in the monthly of the exploitation of software vulnerabilities is, continuously a risk that is happening, not just in September, but just constantly.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that those are still two major trends that, organizations are aware of those risks and the threat that they pose to their own business continuity and, financial security, but it's still successfully exploited quite frequently.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen for sure with North Korean state-sponsored actors that being one of the main kind of attack vectors being used, but more broadly, something that state-sponsored actors have mastered to be able to infiltrate organizations, as well as now cyber criminals, as we're saying, becoming more sophisticated and really just being able to find and spot those zero-day vulnerabilities and using them then to target companies.
It's really interesting. Software vulnerabilities are not going anywhere, and especially 0 days. You find they're exploited before you know about them, and then that's usually how you know about them.
Yeah.
So always a bit difficult to protect from the unknowns.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to note that these are still risks that hopefully can help us build out better security detections. With that, though, from cyber criminals, you also noticed another cyber criminal trend throughout the month that we had covered in the monthly report. What was that one?
So definitely been looking at attacks on healthcare organizations as well, which, following what we've just said just now, it's something that always happens, but we've definitely noticed a significant increase recently. Just to put a couple of figures to really put that in context, since 2015, we've seen actually a 300% increase in attacks against healthcare, which is crazy.
Yes.
It's quite scary. Yeah, it is really scary.
Yeah.
And I'll also kind of cover a little bit more what the implications of that are in a second. But in the last kind of year alone, from 2023 to 2024, attacks on the kind of healthcare sector have really jumped up from 60% to 67%. So again, it is increasing year by year, and it's something to definitely be concerned about.
Yeah. And because this is ransomware particularly, not only does it have operational risks, so it's causing disruption, the security implications, because obviously they were able to get access and entry for who knows how long. But then there's the reputational damage kind of after the fact, but then also the potential life-threatening risks as well as a result. I think earlier this year there was a report about a woman dying because she, the hospital that was affected by a ransomware attack had to divert ambulances, and so her ambulance was diverted to another hospital, but in that time, because of the time differential, she died. So it's you're seeing that not only is it affecting the businesses and the operations of the actual sector, but it's also then having real impacts on actual just day-to-day people, which probably isn't the necessarily intent of these groups, you would hope, but it's the fact that the healthcare is one of the most prevalent sectors getting hit by ransomware. Obviously, it's always vulnerable. There's so many risks that I'm sure you can dive into as well. Yeah. But the fact that they're constantly being inundated with ransomware, and the fact that 91% of data breaches that affected U.S. hospitals the last year were from ransomware. Yeah. Which then it's just the severity of it, not only to just the organizations, but to people in general is quite scary, but just also you wonder what the intent is. It purely financial, or
it obviously covers a lot of risks, but I think that's definitely one of the risks that we tend to forget about, the kind of physical implications of what cybersecurity then is. As you mentioned, obviously life-threatening consequences, it's something that we've taken a very kind of specific look at recently as well, especially because, as you say, if a facility is attacked and is compromised and disrupted, then patients have to be redirected to other facilities. But that obviously means a delay in time and a delay in services. and creating a bottleneck which can cost lives. And there's been actually 2 reports in the UK in the last few months this year so that kind of really show that type of impact. So just to mention a couple, in June, Synovis was attacked by a Russian cybercriminal group. And whilst this primarily affected kind of non-urgent blood tests and also blood transfusions, it really did create a significant bottleneck, which then obviously impacted patients and delays, and sometimes also really kind of important surgeries as well. And this is something just to show how long then organizations can be impacted. This is something that the Synovis was still dealing with a month later, and is kind of taking months to really just get that operational kind of continuity back up. And that's just one mention. More recently, again, Russian linked kind of groups have really attacked like the ambulances kind of services in the UK as well. And that again impacted obviously being able to ship ambulances and having to redirect to other organizations, which again causes a delay in being able to treat people, and obviously can be life threatening in certain occasions. And one very recent report as well highlighted that people who suffer with cardiac diseases and cardiac arrests, because of the urgency of that type of treatment, we've seen obviously an uptick in people actually dying from these types of attacks, which has again very kind of real life practical consequences.
Especially right now in the UK, ambulance times are already high. Yeah, so ransomware exacerbating that just kind of adds to the risk, which is very bleak. But also with that, like healthcare, I guess, is a big, is an attractive target for ransomware, because they run on legacy systems, which tend to be riddled with vulnerabilities that they can't update and fix, because it's either, outdated software that no longer is getting updates, or they can't afford the operational downtime to be able to install those updates. So it's kind of quite multifaceted on the ways that these attacks can occur, particularly to the sector, but also because of the need to be operational all the time, they're more likely to pay a ransom, which right now with a lot of countries have created legislation to try to inhibit ransomware payments from organizations. So it kind of puts entities between a rock and a hard place of pay the ransom and get fined for paying a ransom. But then if they don't pay the ransom, they potentially lose in files that can no longer be recovered. They still have operational downtime from incident response and mitigation, and still have fines from then data protection penalties that they face. So it's kind of it's a lose-lose really for the sector really as a whole. But as well, what can you do? What can you recommend businesses do to kind of try to attempt to mitigate these, especially not only just within the healthcare sector in general, but also within their supply chain? Because it's not just with Synovis, it was the main entity, and the Synovis was infected, which then affected the hospitals. So it's not the hospitals that were actually directly targeted, but it was a vendor. So it's, quite multidimensional. So kind of how could, what should businesses maybe to do to try to mitigate that?
I mean, that's definitely actually a really good point to make. Well, Synovis is part of a bigger group, which was actually attacked 3 times in the past year, and then it kind of trickled down the whole supply chain. But I think there's, we've spoken about many different kind of security measures that can really help mitigate that. And that goes from what we were saying earlier, which could be like phishing awareness courses, to mitigate kind of those entry vectors and really just get around people vulnerabilities, as well as having kind of patch management and really kind of strict patch management as well, to avoid then vulnerabilities being exploited, for example. But anything simple, like for example, changing your passwords frequently, and also not going for very simple combinations to again make it more difficult from that point of view, as well as, for example, network segmentation. Now that you speak about kind of supply chain and just infiltrating different environments, that can be something that's really helpful, especially when we're talking about, hospitals and more difficult environments to secure. Network segmentation can be something that's really helpful to mainly just protect those also key sectors like healthcare, where being able to be operational all the time is really key.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Just before we finish, is there any additional trends that are either emergent or that you think will be ongoing into like the end of October, November, maybe even December that you think clients and customers need to monitor before?
I think there's definitely a couple of things. So following on from something we've actually reported on today, it's definitely the exploitation of cloud environments to then kind of infiltrate networks and also steal credentials, and I guess changing tactics from cyber criminals around exploiting cloud environments as well, which is definitely something that we'll be keeping an eye on, as well as cyber operations in the Middle East and resulting from recent kind of regional escalations between Iran and Israel, and kind of just monitoring how that will shift over the next month or so.
Interesting. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this. I think this has been very fascinating. Bleak in some parts, but definitely really interesting that I think a lot of viewers will really enjoy. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And that wraps up today's special edition of the Insight podcast. We are thinking about doing this on a routine basis. So if you would like to see this more, if you found it interesting, if there's additional topics that you're hoping to hear about in the future, please do comment, review, subscribe, like, and we will hopefully continue to do this on a more routine basis. Thank you so much.